Supreme Commander Zarthek stood before the massive viewing screen in his flagship command center. The star chart showed a small yellow star with 9 planets orbiting around it. His long fingers touched the control panel as he studied the data that had arrived from the scouting ships. The third planet from the star looked blue and green with white clouds swirling around it. According to the reports, this world contained a species that called themselves humans. War scholar Veltari approached from behind, her boots clicking on the metal floor. She carried a data tablet filled with information about this new species. Zarthek turned to face her, his dark eyes showing mild interest. For 3,000 years, the Valdorian Empire had conquered every species they encountered. Some surrendered immediately when they saw the massive dreadnoughts appearing in their skies. Others tried to fight but were crushed within days or weeks. None had ever posed a real challenge to their superior technology. The humans seemed no different from the hundreds of other primitive species they had absorbed into the Empire. Their technology was laughably simple. They used chemical rockets to travel between their own planets, nuclear weapons that were barely more powerful than conventional explosives, and electromagnetic communications that could be intercepted by any first-year academy student. They had not even mastered faster-than-light travel, which the Valdorians had achieved over 4,000 years ago. Veltari handed him the tablet. She had spent weeks studying the intercepted human transmissions, trying to understand their society and military capabilities. What she found was both fascinating and disturbing. The humans seemed to have no central government controlling their entire planet. Instead, they were divided into hundreds of separate nations that often fought each other. They had multiple languages, different religious beliefs, and conflicting political systems. By all logical analysis, they should have destroyed themselves long before achieving space travel. Yet somehow, they had not only survived, but had begun to spread to other worlds in their solar system. They had established colonies on their moon, mining stations on asteroids, and research outposts on the red planet they called Mars. Their ships were crude and inefficient, held together with materials that the Valdorians had stopped using millennia ago. But they worked, and the humans kept building more of them. Zarthek scrolled through the intelligence reports with growing amusement. The humans had detected the approach of the Valdorian fleet weeks ago. Their primitive sensors had picked up the energy signatures of the dreadnoughts as they dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system. Instead of panicking or immediately attempting to negotiate, the humans had done something unexpected. They had started preparing for war. Every human military force in their solar system had been mobilized. Ships that were normally used for cargo transport had been hastily converted into warships. Mining equipment had been repurposed into weapons. Even civilian volunteers were joining their military forces in numbers that seemed impossible for such a divided species. The humans appeared to be treating the arrival of a vastly superior alien force as merely another challenge to overcome. Fleet Commander Korseth entered the command center, his armor still showing scorch marks from the previous campaign. He had just returned from conquering the Zelani system, where 3 different species had surrendered after seeing a single Valdorian dreadnought. The campaign had lasted exactly 4 hours. He expected the human conquest to take even less time. Zarthek gestured toward the star chart. According to standard protocol, they would broadcast an ultimatum to the humans giving them 1 rotation of their planet to surrender. Most species accepted immediately. A few tried to negotiate for better terms. Some attempted to flee to other star systems. The humans would likely follow the same pattern. Their leaders would calculate the hopeless odds, realize that resistance was impossible, and submit to avoid the destruction of their world. The communications officer, a young Valdorian with precise movements and cold efficiency, prepared the standard surrender demand. The message was transmitted on all frequencies the humans used for their crude radio communications. It was simple and direct. The Valdorian Empire offered the humans a choice. They could accept vassal status and serve the Empire, or they could face complete annihilation. They had 24 hours to decide. The response came faster than anyone expected. Instead of the usual pleas for mercy or desperate attempts at negotiation, a single message was transmitted back to the Valdorian fleet. The voice belonged to someone the intelligence reports identified as Admiral Kate Sullivan, commander of the Human Defense Forces. Her words were calm and clear, spoken in the language the humans called English. "We decline." The transmission ended there. No explanation, no counteroffer, no request for more time. Just two simple words that no Valdorian commander had ever heard in response to their ultimatum. The communication center fell silent as everyone tried to process what they had just witnessed. In 3,000 years of conquest, no species had simply said no to the Valdorian Empire. Korseth laughed, thinking it was some kind of translation error. Perhaps the humans had not understood the message. But Veltari checked the transmission records. The humans had received the ultimatum on all their communication networks. Their leaders had clearly understood the terms. They had even broadcast the Valdorian message to their own population. And still, their answer remained the same. Zarthik felt something he had not experienced in centuries. Confusion. Every calculation suggested that the humans should have surrendered immediately. They had no energy shields, no plasma weapons, no faster-than-light capability. Their largest warships were smaller than Valdorian escort vessels. Their entire military force could not match a single dreadnought. Yet they had rejected the ultimatum as if they actually believed they could win. As the Valdorian fleet began moving deeper into the solar system, sensors detected something that made the tactical computers struggle to process the data. The humans were not retreating or hiding. Instead, every ship they possessed was moving toward the approaching invasion force. Captain Jake Morrison of the human vessel UN Defiance led a formation of 20 ships directly toward the Valdorian scouts near the Red Planet. They were charging straight into certain death, and they seemed eager to begin the fight. For the first time since becoming Supreme Commander, Zarthek wondered if perhaps the intelligence reports had missed something important about this strange species called humanity. The first battle happened near Mars 3 days after the humans declined the surrender ultimatum. Captain Jake Morrison led his small fleet of 20 human ships against a Valdorian scouting force of 5 vessels. By every logical calculation, the humans should have been destroyed within minutes. The Valdorian ships had energy shields that could deflect any weapon the humans possessed. Their plasma cannons could cut through human armor like it was made of paper. Their targeting computers were so advanced they could hit a moving target from thousands of kilometers away. But the humans did not fight like any species the Valdorians had ever encountered. Instead of forming neat battle lines and exchanging fire at long range, the human ships scattered in all directions. They moved in patterns that made no tactical sense. Some ships flew straight toward the Valdorian vessels as if they intended to ram them. Others circled around behind asteroids and launched small missiles that seemed too weak to cause any real damage. Commander Alex Turner, Morrison's second in command, had studied the Valdorian ships for weeks using long-range sensors. He noticed something the aliens probably did not realize. Their automated defense systems were designed to track and destroy incoming projectiles based on predictable flight paths. But the human missiles were not following predictable paths. Some of them seemed to malfunction, spinning wildly through space before suddenly correcting course at the last second. Lieutenant Ben Carter flew his fighter in a pattern that should have gotten him killed within seconds. He dove straight toward a Valdorian destroyer, then pulled up at the last moment while releasing a cluster of small explosives. The Valdorian point defense systems tried to target him, but their computers could not predict where he would go next because Carter himself did not know where he would go next. He was making decisions faster than their tactical computers could process them. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched the battle from the bridge of the UN Defiance while analyzing the energy readings from the Valdorian ships. She had spent months studying the wreckage from previous encounters, trying to understand how their technology worked. What she discovered was both brilliant and flawed. The Valdorian energy shields operated on a specific frequency that could be disrupted by the right kind of electromagnetic pulse. The aliens had built their defenses to stop energy weapons and large projectiles, but they had not considered what humans might use against them. The humans began using tactics that horrified the Valdorian commanders. Morrison ordered 3 of his ships to ram the enemy vessels directly. The crews knew they would not survive, but they did it anyway. Their sacrifice allowed other human ships to get close enough to attach magnetic mines to the Valdorian hulls. When those mines exploded, they created electromagnetic pulses that temporarily disabled the alien shields. For the first time in centuries, Valdorian ships took serious damage in battle. 2 destroyers were crippled and had to retreat. A heavy cruiser lost its main weapons and could only defend itself with smaller guns. The scouting force commander sent an urgent message back to the main fleet. The humans were not fighting according to any known tactical doctrine. They seemed willing to sacrifice themselves to achieve their objectives. Their weapons were primitive, but they used them in ways that the Valdorian computers could not predict or counter. War scholar Veltari studied the battle reports with growing concern. She had begun researching human history using intercepted transmissions from their communication networks. What she found disturbed her deeply. Throughout their recorded history, humans had faced superior enemies and found ways to defeat them. They had used small boats to sink massive warships. They had used simple weapons to defeat armies with advanced technology. They had survived ice ages, plagues, and natural disasters that should have wiped them out completely. Most disturbing of all was how humans responded to impossible odds. Instead of surrendering or fleeing, they seemed to become more determined. Their literature was filled with stories about heroes who faced certain death but fought anyway. Their military history showed countless examples of small forces defeating much larger enemies through unconventional tactics and sheer determination. The concept of honorable surrender appeared to be almost unknown to them. Supreme Commander Zarthek dismissed her concerns at first. The humans had gotten lucky in one small engagement, but they could not possibly stand against the full might of the Valdorian invasion fleet. However, as more battles occurred throughout the solar system, a pattern began to emerge. Every encounter with human forces resulted in unexpected casualties and tactical surprises. The humans were learning from each engagement and adapting their strategies faster than anyone thought possible. Admiral Kate Sullivan coordinated the human defense from a hidden command center built inside an asteroid. She had divided her forces into small independent groups that could operate without central coordination. Each group was given a specific objective, but was free to achieve it using whatever methods they thought would work. This approach confused the Valdorian intelligence officers who were used to rigid command, structures, and predictable battle plans. The humans also began broadcasting strange transmissions on frequencies the Valdorians used for military communications. Instead of tactical information or surrender negotiations, they sent music, poetry, and philosophical discussions about freedom and individual rights. Morrison had suggested this psychological warfare campaign after studying captured Valdorian equipment. He believed their society was so rigid and controlled that exposure to human culture might disturb their soldiers. The strategy worked better than anyone expected. Valdorian communications officers began reporting strange reactions among their crews after listening to human transmissions. Some soldiers started asking questions about why they were fighting. Others expressed confusion about human concepts like voluntary military service and democratic government. The idea that humans chose to fight rather than being forced to do so was completely alien to Valdorian thinking. Fleet Commander Korseth tried to ban his crews from listening to human broadcasts, but the damage was already done. Discipline problems began appearing throughout the invasion force. Some crews started questioning orders. Others requested transfers away from the human front. A few even suggested that perhaps the Empire should try negotiating with the humans instead of simply conquering them. Dr. Rodriguez made a breakthrough that changed everything. Working with salvaged Valdorian technology, she discovered how to modify human weapons to penetrate enemy shields. The process was crude and dangerous, but it worked. Human missiles began carrying special warheads that could disrupt Valdorian defensive systems. Plasma rifles were modified to fire on frequencies that the alien shields could not block effectively. The turning point came during the Battle of Europa, one of Jupiter's moons. Turner had devised a strategy that seemed impossible, according to every tactical manual in the galaxy. He planned to hide a large human fleet inside Jupiter's massive radiation field, then emerge at the exact moment when the planet's magnetic field would disrupt Valdorian communications and sensors. The plan required precise timing and incredible courage from every human pilot involved. They would have to fly through radiation levels that could kill them, navigate using only short-range sensors, and coordinate their attack without being able to communicate with each other. Any reasonable commander would have declared the mission impossible and looked for alternatives. But Morrison and his crews were not reasonable by Valdorian standards. They flew into Jupiter's radiation shadow with modified ships that barely held together under the electromagnetic stress. When they emerged on the other side, they caught the Valdorian fleet completely by surprise. The alien ships had been positioned to defend against an attack from the direction of Mars. They never expected enemies to appear from inside the gas giant itself. The battle lasted only 43 minutes. But in that time, the humans achieved something that had not happened in over 1,000 years. They destroyed 3 Valdorian dreadnoughts and forced an entire battle group to retreat. Korseth barely escaped with his life, his flagship severely damaged and his confidence shattered. For the first time since becoming a fleet commander, he had been outmaneuvered by what he considered a primitive species. As news of the human victory spread throughout the Valdorian forces, Zarthek realized that his easy conquest had become something far more dangerous. The humans were not just resisting, they were winning. And with each victory, they grew stronger while his own forces grew more uncertain about their supposed superiority. 6 months after the first battle, the war had changed in ways that no Valdorian commander could have predicted. Supreme Commander Zarthek stared at the reports flooding his command center from across the galaxy. The impossible was happening. Species that had been conquered and enslaved for centuries were beginning to rebel. The news of human victories had spread faster than the Empire could suppress it. Worlds that had never questioned Valdorian rule were now asking why it was taking so long to defeat a single primitive planet. On the mining world of Keltara, workers had stopped production and demanded to know why their overseers could not defeat the humans. On the agricultural planet Nexus 7, farmers were secretly broadcasting human music and discussing concepts like individual freedom and democratic government. Even within the Valdorian military itself, discipline was breaking down as soldiers questioned orders and requested transfers away from the human conflict zone. Admiral Kate Sullivan had coordinated something that military historians would later call the most audacious operation in galactic history. Human ships had broken through the Valdorian blockade and were now operating in deep space, far from Earth. Their mission was not conquest but liberation. They carried with them copies of human technology, tactical manuals, and most importantly, the message that resistance was possible. Captain Jake Morrison led the newly formed Liberation Fleet to the Zephyrian system, where an aquatic species had been enslaved for over 800 years. The Zephyrians had given up hope of freedom long ago, but when human ships appeared in their skies broadcasting messages of hope and offering weapons and training, something awakened in them that the Valdorians thought they had destroyed forever. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had established mobile research stations throughout the asteroid belt, each one developing new weapons and technologies using a combination of human engineering and captured Valdorian equipment. Her teams were creating things that should not have been possible, according to established scientific principles. They built ships that looked like floating scrapyards but could outmaneuver the finest Valdorian cruisers. They designed weapons that violated every rule of conventional warfare but worked with deadly effectiveness. The humans had learned something that the Valdorians had forgotten over their millennia of dominance. Desperation breeds innovation. When faced with impossible odds, humans did not calculate the probability of success and surrender when the numbers looked bad. Instead, they found new ways to change the rules of the game entirely. They fought battles in asteroid fields where large ships could not operate effectively. They used gravity wells and solar radiation as weapons. They turned their own weaknesses into advantages. Commander Alex Turner had become something of a legend among both human and alien forces. His tactical innovations were being studied and copied by resistance movements across the galaxy. He had developed a new form of warfare that the Valdorians called ghost fighting. Small human ships would appear without warning, strike at vulnerable targets, and disappear before reinforcements could arrive. They never stayed in one place long enough to be trapped, and they never fought fair battles where superior numbers might overwhelm them. War scholar Feltari had compiled a comprehensive analysis of human military doctrine that terrified every Valdorian officer who read it. The humans were not just fighting a war of conquest or defense. They were fighting a war of ideas. Every engagement was designed not just to destroy enemy ships, but to demonstrate that the Valdorian Empire could be defeated. Every victory proved to watching alien species that their supposed masters were not invincible. The breaking point came when Zarthek received orders from the Imperial capital to end the human problem immediately. The ruling council had grown tired of the embarrassment and was sending reinforcements. 1,000 ships representing the cream of the Valdorian Navy were being dispatched to crush Earth once and for all. The fleet included planet-killer weapons that could sterilize entire worlds and dreadnoughts so large they carried their own escort fleets. but the humans had 6 months to prepare for this moment. When the massive Valdorian armada arrived at the edge of the solar system, they found something that should not have existed. Earth was no longer the primitive world they had first encountered. The planet was surrounded by a maze of defense platforms, converted asteroids, and weapon emplacements that operated on principles the Valdorians did not understand. Lieutenant Ben Carter, now promoted to squadron leader, coordinated the defense of Earth's orbital space. His pilots flew ships that looked like they had been built in scrapyards because many of them had been. Each vessel was unique, designed by individual engineers who had been given basic requirements but told to solve the problems however they thought best. The result was a fleet that no tactical computer could analyze because no two ships fought the same way. The siege of Earth began with Zarthek, confident that overwhelming force would finally solve the human problem. His 1,000 ships moved in perfect formation, their energy shields glowing like stars against the darkness of space, their weapons charged with enough power to crack continents. Their computers calculated firing solutions with mathematical precision. Everything proceeded according to standard Valdorian tactical doctrine. The humans responded by ignoring every rule of space combat that had been established over thousands of years. Instead of meeting the invasion fleet in open battle, they let the Valdorians come to them. Hidden weapon platforms opened fire from unexpected angles. Converted asteroids revealed themselves to be massive missile batteries. Ships emerged from behind planets and moons where they should not have been able to hide. Fleet Commander Corseth found his carefully planned assault dissolving into chaos as human forces attacked from directions his sensors said were empty space. His formation was broken apart by weapons that seemed to appear from nowhere. Ships that looked like harmless civilian transports suddenly revealed hidden missile launchers and energy cannons. The humans were fighting with equipment that should not have worked but somehow did. Turner had coordinated the most complex defensive operation in human history. Every piece of space debris in the solar system had been turned into a potential weapon. Every moon and asteroid contained hidden bases or weapon emplacements. The humans had created a 3-dimensional battlefield where the Valdorians could be attacked from any direction at any time. Their superior technology meant nothing when they could not predict where the next attack would come from. The turning point came when Carter led a desperate mission that no sane pilot would have attempted. He flew his fighter directly into the engine core of the largest Valdorian dreadnought, carrying with him a human-built explosive device that Dr. Rodriguez had designed specifically for this purpose. The weapon was not just a bomb, but a cascading energy disruptor that would spread through the enemy ship's power systems. Carter's sacrifice triggered a chain reaction that destroyed not just the dreadnought but 7 other major ships in the formation. The explosion created an energy pulse that disabled dozens more vessels and sent shockwaves through the entire Valdorian fleet. In a single moment, the humans had achieved what should have been impossible. They had broken the back of the largest invasion force in galactic history. As Valdorian ships began retreating from Earth orbit, Zarthek faced the unthinkable reality that his empire's finest fleet had been defeated by a species they had dismissed as primitive. The loss was not just military but psychological. If humans could defeat the Valdorian Empire's best efforts, then perhaps the Empire was not as invincible as everyone believed. Across the galaxy, the news of Earth's victory spread like wildfire. Species that had been enslaved for generations began to understand that their chains were not as strong as they had been taught to believe. The humans had proven that resistance was not only possible but effective. The Valdorian Empire, which had seemed eternal and unshakable, had shown its first cracks. For the first time in 3,000 years, a supreme commander of the Valdorian Empire was forced to retreat from a battle he should have won easily. As his damaged fleet limped back toward friendly space, Zarthek wondered if the Empire had finally encountered something it could not conquer through superior force alone. The collapse of the Valdorian Empire did not happen with a single great battle or dramatic explosion. Instead, it crumbled like an ancient building whose foundation had been quietly eaten away by time and neglect. Supreme Commander Zarthek returned from his defeat at Earth to find that his empire was already breaking apart from within. The news of the human victory had spread to every corner of the galaxy, and with it came something the Valdorians had never faced before in their 3,000 years of rule. Hope was spreading like a virus through the conquered worlds. On Theta Prime, the insectoid Thrakari had stopped mining the precious metals that powered Valdorian technology. On the water world of Aquanus, The dolphin-like cetaceans had refused to continue processing the algae that fed half the empire. Everywhere the Valdorians looked, species that had been obedient for centuries were suddenly remembering what it felt like to say no. Captain Jake Morrison had become something of a legend throughout the galaxy. His liberation fleet now included ships from dozens of different species, all flying together under a banner that read, "Freedom through choice" in 17 different languages. The fleet moved from system to system, not conquering but teaching. They showed enslaved populations how to modify their equipment into weapons, how to coordinate resistance movements, and most importantly, how to believe in themselves again. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had established the first interspecies research centers in galactic history. Scientists from different worlds were working together, sharing knowledge that had been hoarded by the Empire for millennia. The collaborative approach was producing breakthroughs at a rate that stunned even the humans. Technologies that had remained unchanged for thousands of years were being improved and refined by minds that approached problems from completely different perspectives. War scholar Veltari had made a decision that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. She had defected from the Valdorian Empire and was now working with Admiral Kate Sullivan to establish what they called the Free Species Alliance. The concept was revolutionary in its simplicity. Instead of one species ruling over all others, every world would govern itself and cooperate with others voluntarily. The idea was so foreign to imperial thinking that most Valdorians could not even understand what it meant. Fleet Commander Korseth found himself leading increasingly desperate attempts to regain control of rebel worlds. But everywhere he went, he encountered the same problem. The resistance forces had learned human tactics and were using them with devastating effectiveness. They did not meet his fleets in open battle where superior technology might prevail. Instead, they struck at supply lines, communication networks, and isolated outposts. They made every victory costly and every defeat humiliating. The Valdorian military, which had been built for conquest and intimidation, was completely unprepared for the kind of warfare the humans had taught their allies. Valdorian soldiers were trained to follow orders without question, and to rely on their technological superiority to overcome any opposition. When faced with enemies who improvised constantly and seemed to have no respect for established military doctrine, they became confused and demoralized. Commander Alex Turner had been promoted to general and was now coordinating liberation movements across an entire galactic arm. His tactical manuals were being translated into hundreds of languages and distributed to resistance cells throughout the Empire. The basic principles were simple enough that any species could adapt them to their own capabilities. Fight when you can win, hide when you cannot, and always remember that your enemy's greatest weakness is their inability to imagine that you might do something unexpected. The psychological impact of the human philosophy was even more destructive to Valdorian control than their military tactics. Throughout the Empire, conquered species were learning about concepts like individual rights, democratic government, and voluntary cooperation. The idea that people could choose their own leaders and make their own laws was so radical that it shook the foundations of imperial society. Even within the Valdorian military itself, discipline was breaking down as soldiers began questioning the empire they served. Some asked why they were fighting to keep other species enslaved. Others wondered why the empire needed to rule through fear and oppression if their civilization was truly superior. A few brave individuals began suggesting that perhaps the humans had found a better way to organize society. Admiral Sullivan had coordinated the formation of the first truly democratic interstellar government in galactic history. Representatives from liberated worlds met in rotating locations to discuss common problems and coordinate mutual aid. The meetings were chaotic by Valdorian standards, with delegates arguing passionately about everything from trade policies to military strategy. But somehow decisions got made and problems got solved. The Free Species Alliance was not perfect, and the humans were the first to admit it. Different species had different needs and different ways of solving problems. Some conflicts seemed impossible to resolve through peaceful negotiation, but the Alliance had something the Valdorian Empire had never possessed. It had the consent of the governed. People fought for it because they chose to, not because they were forced to. Zarthek received orders from the imperial capital that filled him with dread. The ruling council had decided that if they could not control the rebellion, they would end it by destroying its source. A planet-killer weapon was being prepared to eliminate Earth permanently. The logic was simple and brutal. Without the humans to inspire them, the other rebel species would lose hope and return to obedience. But Turner had anticipated this possibility. He had established a network of human-trained instructors throughout the galaxy, each one capable of teaching resistance tactics to new populations. Even if Earth was destroyed, the knowledge of how to fight for freedom would survive. The humans had created something that could not be eliminated by destroying a single world or killing particular leaders. The planet-killer weapon was a massive construct that required months to charge and could only be used once before, needing to be rebuilt. Zarthek knew that using it would be an admission that the Empire could no longer win through conventional means. It would also prove to every watching species that the Valdorians were willing to commit genocide to maintain their power. As the weapon approached Earth, Morrison coordinated the most desperate defense in human history. Every ship in the Liberation Fleet converged on Earth's solar system. Allies from dozens of worlds sent whatever forces they could spare. The final battle would not just determine the fate of humanity, but the future of freedom throughout the galaxy. Turner had one last tactical surprise prepared for the Valdorians. Instead of trying to destroy the planet-killer weapon, he planned to capture it and turn it against the Empire itself. The plan was incredibly dangerous and would require perfect coordination between human forces and their alien allies. But if it worked, it would send a message throughout the galaxy that would end the war once and for all. Dr. Rodriguez had discovered that the planet-killer weapon could be reprogrammed if someone could get close enough to its control systems. The weapon's designers had never imagined that anyone would be crazy enough to attempt a boarding action against such a heavily defended target. They had not accounted for human determination and the willingness of their allies to sacrifice everything for the chance at freedom. As the final battle began, Feltari broadcast a message to Valdorian forces throughout the galaxy. She explained why she had joined the rebellion and urged her former colleagues to consider whether the empire they served was worth preserving. Her words reached soldiers who were already questioning their orders and gave them the courage to make their own choice about which side of history they wanted to join. The battle for Earth's survival became the battle for the soul of galactic civilization. On one side stood an empire built on conquest and oppression, armed with the ultimate weapon of destruction. On the other side stood a loose alliance of free peoples, united only by their refusal to accept that might makes right. The outcome would determine whether the galaxy's future belonged to those who ruled through fear or those who led through inspiration. The final battle for Earth lasted 18 hours and changed the course of galactic history forever. When it was over, the Valdorian Empire existed only in history books, and the galaxy had learned a new way to live. Commander Alex Turner stood on the bridge of what had once been the Empire's most powerful weapon, now reprogrammed and under human control. Through the massive viewing windows, he could see the wreckage of the Valdorian fleet drifting in space like broken dreams. The boarding action that captured the planet-killer weapon had cost thousands of lives, but it had succeeded beyond anyone's wildest hopes. Dr. Elena Rodriguez and her team had not only reprogrammed the weapon, but had broadcast its new targeting information throughout the galaxy. Instead of destroying Earth, the massive device had eliminated the Valdorian imperial capital in a single devastating strike that ended 3,000 years of tyrannical rule. Supreme Commander Zarthek had died in the destruction of his homeworld, but his final transmission had been picked up by communication stations across the galaxy. In his last moments, he had finally understood what the humans had done to his empire. They had not simply defeated it in battle. They had shown every conquered species that freedom was possible, that resistance could succeed, and that no amount of technological superiority could overcome the determination of people fighting for their right to choose their own destiny. War scholar Feltari had survived the final battle and now found herself in the strange position of helping to build something that had never existed before in galactic history. The Free Species Alliance was growing rapidly as world after world declared independence from the collapsed empire. Each species was free to govern itself however it chose, but they were also invited to participate in a voluntary confederation based on mutual aid and shared principles of individual freedom. Captain Jake Morrison had become the first human ambassador to the new galactic government, but he insisted that his role was temporary. The humans had no interest in replacing the Valdorian Empire with a human one. Their goal had always been to create a galaxy where every species could flourish according to its own nature and values. The concept of ruling over others was as foreign to human thinking as the concept of democracy had been to the Valdorians. Admiral Kate Sullivan coordinated the massive humanitarian effort that followed the Empire's collapse. Millions of Valdorian citizens found themselves suddenly without a government, without leadership, and without the rigid structure that had defined their society for millennia. Many were terrified by the prospect of making their own decisions and taking responsibility for their own lives. The humans and their allies worked tirelessly to help them adjust to their new freedom. The transformation was not easy for anyone involved. Species that had been enemies for centuries had to learn to work together as equals. Different approaches to science, philosophy, and government had to be reconciled without forcing anyone to abandon their fundamental beliefs. There were disagreements, conflicts, and moments when it seemed like the whole project might collapse into chaos. But the humans had learned something important during their long struggle against the Empire. Problems that seemed impossible to solve often became manageable when everyone involved was allowed to contribute their own ideas and expertise. The collaborative approach that Dr. Rodriguez had pioneered in her research stations became the model for the new galactic civilization. Turner established the first interspecies military academy where beings from dozens of different worlds learned not just tactics and strategy, but the fundamental principle that military force should exist to protect freedom rather than impose the will of the powerful. The Academy's graduates became the peacekeepers of the new galaxy, sworn to defend the rights of all species to determine their own fate. The economic transformation was perhaps even more dramatic than the political one. Under the Empire, resources had flowed from conquered worlds to the Valdorian core systems, creating vast wealth for the rulers and poverty for everyone else. The new system was based on voluntary trade and mutual benefit. Worlds that had been forced to provide raw materials could now use those resources for their own development or trade them for fair compensation. The scientific revolution that followed the Empire's collapse exceeded even Dr. Rodriguez's optimistic projections. When researchers from different species were free to share their knowledge and approach problems from multiple perspectives, the rate of discovery accelerated exponentially. Technologies that had remained stagnant for thousands of years under imperial control were suddenly advancing at breathtaking speed. 5 years after the final battle, Morrison stood once again on the bridge of the UN Defiance, but now the ship was part of a truly integrated fleet that included vessels from over 100 different worlds. He was reviewing reports from exploration missions that were pushing the boundaries of known space, seeking out new species to invite into the growing alliance of free peoples. The humans had discovered something that the Valdorians had never understood despite their technological superiority. True strength came not from the ability to force others to obey, but from the willingness to inspire them to achieve their best. A galaxy of free peoples working together voluntarily was far more powerful than any empire built on conquest and oppression. Beltari had written extensively about the fall of her former empire, and her analysis had become required reading in schools throughout the galaxy. She explained that the Valdorians had not been defeated by superior weapons or better tactics. They had been defeated by an idea that was more powerful than any technology. The idea that every individual had the right to be free, to make their own choices, and to live according to their own values. The former Valdorian worlds had struggled the most with the transition to freedom. Many of their citizens had been so conditioned to follow orders that they found decision-making almost impossible. But gradually, with patient help from human counselors and advisors from other liberated species, they began to discover the joy of self-determination. Some established democratic governments similar to those found on Earth. Others developed entirely new forms of organization that reflected their unique cultural values. The memorial to Lieutenant Ben Carter was built on Earth's moon, visible to anyone approaching the planet. His sacrifice had made the final victory possible, but more importantly, it had demonstrated the human principle that some things were worth dying for. The memorial inscription read simply, "He chose to be free and in choosing freed us all." Admiral Sullivan often reflected on how quickly everything had changed. Just a few years earlier, Humanity had been a single isolated species facing impossible odds against a galactic empire. Now they were part of a vast community of free peoples working together to build a better future for everyone. The transformation had been so complete that many young beings could barely imagine what life had been like under Imperial rule. The day the humans broke the Valdorian Empire was remembered, not as a military victory but as the moment when the galaxy learned a new way to live. It was the day when beings throughout the stars discovered that they did not have to accept oppression as the natural order of things. It was the day when the idea of freedom spread from one small blue planet to transform an entire galaxy. In his final report as Supreme Commander, Zarthek had written words that became famous throughout the new galactic civilization. We thought we were unbreakable because we had never been broken. The humans did not break our ships or our weapons. They broke the idea that might makes right. And once that idea was broken, everything else we had built crumbled to dust. The galaxy was no longer ruled by fear but inspired by hope. The humans had given every species the most precious gift imaginable, the knowledge that freedom was not only possible, but achievable. They had proven that even the most powerful empire could not stand against people who refused to surrender their right to choose their own destiny. The day the humans broke the Valdorians was the day the galaxy learned to believe in itself.